CBT is great. I use it every day. I've done thousands of CBT sessions, but there's a limit to what you can do when you're only working with the conscious mind. Hypnosis actually lets you access the deeper stuff in the subconscious mind that drives emotional learning. These are the types of things that you can almost never get to in standard talk therapy. I'm Dr. Andrew Lima. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I specialize in helping people who have failed traditional methods. Most of what I use is technologically based, brain-based treatments such as neurofeedback therapy, QEEG brain mapping, biofeedback, virtual reality exposure therapy, and yes, clinical hypnosis. I find that the combination of hypnosis and neurofeedback works synergistically and really catapult patients into a whole new level of change. Let's start with a working definition of hypnosis. I'm going to read you a widely accepted definition. It's a trance-like state where the mind becomes more open to suggestion, not in a mind control way, but in the same way that your brain is more flexible when you're dreaming. So there's a few things there. A trance-like state, that's something that people usually are afraid of, but all a trance is a deeply relaxed, deeply focused state. And then the other term used in that definition is suggestion. Suggestion is really nothing more than a belief that's housed in the subconscious. So for example, a belief that many people have is, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable. How did those suggestions or beliefs get into the subconscious? From years of emotional learning from somebody's upbringing. So the kind of stance in hypnosis and hypnotherapy is just as easily as those messages got in there, we can also get them out. However, we need the right ingredients. I can tell you the way that you can't get those out. It's just interacting with the conscious mind. You have to go deeper. The other thing mentioned there was dreaming. When we dream, the conscious mind kind of melts away and the subconscious mind becomes a lot more active. People report similar things when they take psychedelic drugs. So when we can clear out all that conscious activity, we can much easier access the subconscious stuff. And the only way to do that is by getting the person into a deeply relaxed, deeply focused state. And that's what we call a trance. There's some myths about hypnosis, which I'm going to cover later in the video. But one of those common myths are that not everybody is hypnotizable. And I don't believe that's true at all. See, we're kind of hypnotized all the time. Somebody scrolling through their phone on TikTok, somebody driving down the road and just kind of spaced out, and next thing you know, you're home. Those are all kind of light versions of hypnosis. And of course, when we go to sleep every night and we dream, that's kind of a similar state as a trance. Now, hypnosis is not sleeping or dreaming. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. When somebody's in a hypnotic state, they're deeply focused and deeply sharp. If anything, they're kind of wide awake in that state, but they're extremely relaxed. One thing about hypnosis also is it melts away pain response. So hypnosis used to frequently be used in surgeries and dental procedures. That's kind of fallen by the wayside as anesthesia and drugs have become more popular. And just know that being in that hypnotic trance, somebody can literally have a cavity filled and have no pain response. In fact, it's one of the ways that we test if somebody's in a hypnotic trance. You can kind of pinch them and see that they almost have no pain response. What the person will report is they felt something, but it just didn't bother them at all. That pain response is totally bypassed, which is really cool. Let's talk about a real case. A guy that came to my office, we'll call him John, it's not his real name, but he's in his 20s. And he had a lifelong fear of driving. He could drive, he would get behind the wheel and drive. However, he was riddled with anxiety, dreaded it, avoided all situations that required him to drive more than 30 minutes because he would just be flooded with panic. This kind of definitely falls under the classification of a specific phobia, where the person might be able to still do it, they're just flooded with fear and anxiety, and there's lots of avoidance that kicks in. This guy's life was definitely being impacted by it. He didn't have much of a social life because he would turn down all social invitations because a lot of it required him to drive. He'd done years of cognitive behavioral therapy. He'd done exposure therapy. He'd taken medications. They were helpful, but the fear was still there. And so what these other treatments did was they kind of took down the intensity a little bit and got him where he didn't avoid driving altogether. Like he could still drive somewhere. He just usually had to take propranolol to lower his heart rate, and sometimes would have to take a Xanax when he got home because his nervous system would be so revved up. This isn't living, this is surviving at its best. And my goals with patients are usually to get them to the point where they're living their best, freest life and aren't being held back by their symptoms. So this patient contacted me for CBT, and I told him, look, you've done lots of CBT. I don't think more CBT is gonna help you. Let's try something different. So I had him come down to my office and I blocked out a 3-hour time slot in my schedule, which I frequently will do for very intense types of patients. and patients who I know I can make rapid change with pretty quickly. So he came into my office, we spent some time talking. He had no idea where this phobia had come from, by the way. He couldn't remember any sort of traumatic events that had happened in his life that caused the anxiety of driving. So what I did was we talked about hypnosis. I gave him what's one of the most important things about hypnosis is something called a pre-talk, which is where you're informing the patient about what's about to happen, dispelling myths for them, which allows them to be able to really relax and get into that trance much easier than if you don't do a pre-talk and you just try to dive right into hypnosis with them. It's gonna really impede them from getting into a deep level of trance. So I informed him about hypnosis. He was willing to try it. He trusted me. He felt safe with me. Those are all very important ingredients. If you don't feel safe and if you don't trust the person who's doing the hypnotherapy on you, you're not gonna be able to let yourself totally go like you need to. And if you don't let yourself totally go, you're not going to be able to access the subconscious. So what I did was I did what's called an induction, which is where we induce that very deeply relaxed state of hypnosis. And this patient dropped pretty quickly. It doesn't take very long. Within 5 to 10 minutes, you can induce a very deep state of hypnosis. So within 10 minutes, I had this guy in an extremely deeply relaxed state of hypnosis. And we did what's called a hypnotic regression. So in this deeply relaxed state, you can go back to these very early events that you can't remember through the conscious mind. So I regressed him back to the very first time he felt that anxiety behind the car, and this extremely vivid memory of when he was 3 years old came up for him. He described this car accident in extreme detail, and I could see him actually getting distressed. When somebody does a true hypnotic regression, you don't relive it like in the third person, you actually re-experience it like it's happening in the moment. And it's extremely powerful, and if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not a skilled hypnotherapist, you won't know how to handle some of these reactions that come up for people because sometimes they can relive the emotions very intensely. So this person started crying immediately and was describing glass shattered around him, his car seat being shattered, being cut out of the car by the EMTs. What's really interesting about a hypnotic regression, when somebody relives a childhood memory, they usually start to speak in very simple terms, just like a child would. And I will interact with them as if they're a child, so use very simple terms. And so this very vivid memory of this car accident at 3 years old came up, which had never come up in his previous therapies. We worked through it. There's a whole process in hypnosis where you can work through traumatic memories and then release them. And we spent about an hour and a half to 2 hours reworking this early memory and then subsequent traumas that came after that. And when I emerged the patient, he was shocked, and so was I. He wasn't sure if that memory was true. So that's one of the criticisms you'll see about hypnotic regressions is, are these memories false memories? Are they made up? So I said to him, listen, why don't you call your mom right now and ask her if that's the case? So he did. He called his mom right there in my office on speakerphone and asked her, told her what was going on and asked her if this had really happened to him. And she said, yes, you were in a really bad car accident when you were 3 years old. His jaw almost dropped. He was like, why didn't you tell me this? All these years of therapy, all this money I spent on therapy, all this anxiety. And she thought that she would actually re-traumatize him. So they just thought it was better to never tell him, which kind of gets me to another point of re-traumatization. Why wasn't he re-traumatized, reliving this in hypnosis? Well, the reality is about the nervous system is you can't be in two states at once. You can't be extremely anxious and deeply relaxed at the same time. They're physiologically incompatible states. So in this hypnotic trance, the person is extremely relaxed and is able to access those early traumas without getting their nervous system flooded like they would if they were able to recall the memory from a conscious state. So anyway, this patient had this conversation with his mom, he hung up, I sent him on his way, and he came back a week later and told me for the first time in his life, he had zero fear behind the wheel. It was weird to him because all these years he'd had this whole ritual for reducing his anxiety when he got home, and before getting in the car, he had all this dread. It was all gone. In 1 week, in one session, it was gone. And I wasn't surprised by it like the patient was. The reality is when we make subconscious shifts, our whole life changes. So the subconscious is what's driving a lot of this conscious fear and anxiety that we have. And what him and I were able to do was release all that early subconscious trauma, which then was able to shape how he behaved in the moment. Once the mind is able to process trauma in an emotionally safe and controlled way, the emotional charge of a situation tends to disappear. That's really the magic and the biggest difference between hypnosis and CBT. So we ended up spending our second session just talking and reprocessing what happened. And I found no more need to do anything else with him. By all means, he was cured. The fear was gone. The anxiety in which he spent years in therapy trying to work on and why he came in to see me was gone. So I said, listen, why don't we do this? Let's check in a month. So let's give it a month and see if this is still holding. And if it is, great, then you're done, you're cured. So we checked in over Zoom. A month later, patient was doing great, no anxiety, no need to see me, no more propranolol, no more Xanax. So CBT works with conscious thoughts and conscious memories. But if a fear was created before language and memory was accessible to the person, CBT is not going to get you out of that. You can't think your way out of something. It's like trying to fix a glitch in your operating system by editing a Word document. You're just working with the wrong layer of processing. It's kind of like trying to fix deep subconscious fears by just interacting with the conscious mind. It just doesn't work. So think of your mind as being two layers. You can the classic example is like an iceberg. On the top, we have our conscious mind, which has logic, reasoning, thoughts, and coping tools. Underneath the deeper layer, you can think of the subconscious mind as housing memory, emotional responses, automatic responses, impulses. This is where the foundation of emotional learning is housed, and it's not so readily accessible through the conscious mind. Hypnosis gives you direct access to that subconscious space, but not in a mind control type of way, in a deeply relaxed, deeply focused way where we kind of have a direct road into the subconscious. And once you get to the origins of that early fear, you can reframe it and re-update how the person sees their entire life. So I'm going to go over 4 common myths about hypnosis. Myth 1 is that you lose control. No, you're aware the entire time. Myth 2 is that you can get stuck in hypnosis forever. Not true. Myth 3 is that hypnosis is sleep. It's actually a very focused state. Myth 4 is that it's fake. Not true. Neuroscience has proven that hypnosis and trance is real, and you see real measurable changes in the person's memory, focus, anxiety, and long-term change. So to wrap things up, I'm not anti-CBT. I like CBT. I think it's just one other tool in the entire arsenal of mental health. What I worry about CBT is that it's just overutilized. I can't tell you how many people call me on the phone and say, my child has anxiety, I think he needs CBT. And that's because they read that somewhere. And CBT has a lot of research backing because it's easy to research. If it's administered in a manualized way where the person follows a manual and a strict protocol, it's pretty easy to measure outcomes in that way in a short amount of time. And that's why we hear a lot of buzz about it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most effective way. And what I see so often is there's lots of great CBT therapists, but there's a lot of patients stuck with just CBT on its own. Patients will sit in CBT for years on end, just like my patient that I told you about, and I've seen many more just like him, and their symptoms just remain unwavering. So if you know someone who's been stuck, they might not just be working with the right layer. Sometimes you have to go deeper into the subconscious to make long-lasting, real change. If you like this type of content, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more. See you in the next one.
Visit us at centerforcognitivegrowth.com.